Welcome to this online event of the John Adams Institute. My name is Tracy Metz. Tomorrow is the big day. The Dutch get to vote for a new parliament. So here on the eve of election day, we have invited Arun Chaudhary, who was a campaigner with both Obama and Bernie Sanders. He was invited by the Dutch Labour Party, the PvdA, to advise them on their campaign this year. Arun has been to the John Adams before, on the day after the US elections in November. And he was so cool and so funny that we thought, we'll bring him back. We'll be talking with him about campaigning the American way. How is it possible that Kamala Harris's sneakers from the cover of Vogue ended up on the feet of Sigrid Kaag? What can the Dutch learn about American campaign strategy? What to do, and of course also what not to do. Send us your questions via the chat on YouTube Live on our YouTube channel, and I'll pass them on to our moderator, Laila Frank, well-known American journalist. Laila, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Arun, for joining us, and thank you all at home for your patience at this point and for tuning in. We are indeed going to talk about political campaigns tonight on the verge of our own national elections here in the Netherlands. And although nowadays we tend to look overseas to the United States for lessons about political campaigns, they are as old as society and as old as Europe. So I dug up an old favorite of mine. It's a book called How to Win an Election, an Ancient Guide for Modern Politicians. And it's written by Quintus Cicero as sort of a guidebook for his brother, Marcus Cicero, who ran as a consul, or who ran for consul in Rome in, I think it was 64 before Christ. And it's just such a useful handbook, a guidebook basically for people who want to run campaigns, and it's so remarkably up to date. He has 10 rules basically, such as give people hope, flatter voters shamelessly, don't leave town, communication skills are key, make sure you have the backing of your family and friends. All things that are remarkably up to date and so useful also if you run a campaign or work in campaigns these days. I brought it with me because it points to something very obvious but crucial, and that is that campaigns are essentially about people, which makes campaigning a very universal experience. So what can and can we not learn from American campaigns? What part of campaigning is cultural and what part is just human? And how does that translate into right and left-wing trends in politics, both on this side of the ocean as in the United States? I'm so happy that we have Arun with us tonight as our speaker to talk about all those topics because he has experience on both sides of the ocean. We are gonna start with a little introduction of Arun done by the BBC, and Arun, you can take it right away after that. Enjoy.
You know, I think it's obvious to see the surface differences between Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders, but actually you have two very authentic candidates who are themselves on and off camera, who don't waver, you know, and don't seem to bend to popular opinion. And I think especially young people who are so concerned about education, so concerned about climate change, who are concerned with the core messages of Bernie Sanders, who know that they're growing up in the richest country in the world and yet no one seems to have any money. This stuff resonates with young people, resonates with millennials. And so while on the surface Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders may seem to be very different folks, they're very, very similar. Bernie Sanders doesn't have to tailor his message to any audience. It is just resonating and is authentic. But if you're talking about my work, we have actually adjusted the aesthetics of our photography and videography, I think, to the current situation. The iPhones take great photos, and they're very flat and perfect and in focus. And so that's why in our work we really highlight imperfections. If you look at our photographs, we use a lot of lens flare. We have a very gritty feel to them. Sometimes they're even a little out of focus. And that, I think, is just to make them stand out against what is just a plethora of media that looks the same online.
Arun, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'm especially pleased that I got to use the word plethora for your audience, which of course is a nickel SAT word if I've ever heard one. Look, happy election eve, everyone. I'm extraordinarily pleased to be back here with the good folks at John Adams. And look, this is a promise because I was supposed to be there in person, not only for this election, but also for this evening. And because I can't make it, let's set a date and let's say we will do this again when it can be in person, when we can have a real discussion back and forth, whether that be the summer next year, it will be sometime, and we will commit ourselves to doing it. Look, this is such an interesting and big topic, and so I put together a bit of a small presentation, and I hope you'll bear with me as I throw it together and put it on. But I do think it's interesting because as Ronald Reagan, let me paraphrase Ronald Reagan and say the most scary thing anyone around the world will ever hear is, I'm here from the United States government and I'd like to help. This is, of course, the opposite of what people like me would normally want to have you believe, that there's something special and secret we're doing in America. But here's the real secret. Campaigning the American way just means spending an unholy amount of money on it all the time because of our lack of regulation and laws. But like Layla was saying, politics doesn't change much. So America is the laboratory, not because we're on the front of anything, but because we're actually just spending money all the time. We'll talk about it a little bit. But essentially, in America, we've achieved a sort of consensus about how campaigns should be run. You know, and I think you don't have to be Cicero or the modern versions of this book, which has come out over and over again. I was just talking with Layla before about how there's a book called Plunkett of Tammany Hall, which came out in 1911, that's almost the same exact book. So we've achieved a consensus on a certain kind of politics that works. And this is essentially the kind of Obama, post-Obama, campaigning political ethos. But what it really is campaigning post-broadcast. And what I mean by broadcast is not TV necessarily. What I mean by broadcast is the idea that I used to be able to make sure you had to watch my content. You know, if you wanted to watch that episode of Matlock on TV, you were going to have to see my television commercial. Now, I need to make a piece of content that's so compelling that, like this otter wearing 3D glasses, you just can't turn your head away from it because it's just so perfect. We know to meet people where they're at. Mostly that means online. We know to always match the message with the messenger. You know, you don't want to have a rich person giving a populist message necessarily. And we always remember, of course, that digital is not an arms race. You know, in this world of I got a million hits here, I got a million hits there, that's not what it's about. It's actually about engagement. And that's how human beings win elections. We all agree that this is how it works. And so obviously from this last election we had, an amazingly historic election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, this must be the most consequential election ever, as we say every American presidential election. And I'm sure we can learn a lot from it, right? Not really. You know, not only can we not learn a lot from the American election, we can't learn a lot from the American Democratic primary, which should have been the most instructive thing in the world. Look at all of these people who ran. A lot of them are very famous. A lot of them have real teams. A lot of them have real digital programs. And yet the value of a primary, which is to get different kinds of voters all together and then hand leader all of those new votes that normally wouldn't have, didn't happen. Joe Biden barely ran. He had a very low-key campaign. He had even a very small digital presence. So nothing that interesting, and I just want quickly, a quick aside on this slide, is about the one interesting thing that did change this election. I don't want to totally give it short thrift, was relational organizing. And that's the idea that this kind of big broadcast advertising, where I'm trying to reach millions of people, doesn't work nearly as well as when you, an ordinary person, reach out to 20 or 30 people who you know, because they actually can be changed. So this relational organizing was something new, was something kind of perfected by the Markey campaign and by the Bernie Sanders campaign this time around, but not by Joe Biden. Joe Biden basically ran a driveway campaign, I'm calling it. This is, of course, an Onion article. It's not actually Joe Biden. But he, you know, got his message out through spokespeople, through the mainstream media, and didn't really rely on other things. And look, you know, we might have wanted to have some perfect, huge, you know, Democratic primary in which spiritual voters who supported Marianne Williamson, Asian voters who supported Andrew Yang, all kind of came together into this really big pool for Joe Biden. But that's not what we did. We went to war with the army we had, which is, you know, general Democrats. But there were things that we did have in our candidate that were advantages, and one of them is empathy and authenticity. So when people ask me what I did this election, you know, you're sure you must have been exciting to work on this election, just like it was for Obama and for Bernie. I actually didn't work in this election, except I did one thing. You know, as a filmmaker who's gotten to film a lot of these people, I knew I had beautiful, beautiful footage of Joe Biden. I knew it was perfect. I knew it couldn't come from the campaign because, you know, it's not the right, again, you match the messenger to the message. And so I set myself a reminder about a year earlier that said, if Joe Biden is the nominee, release this video 2 weeks before the campaign. And then 2 weeks before the campaign, my little reminder note came up, and I released this video into the wild.
Who are the parents?
Yeah.
I'm wife. I'm Chris Hexon's wife.
God love
I wanted to. This is Chris's son.
you. Well, how are you? Thank you for hugging me. You okay? You okay? You'll be okay. We're gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay. I promise. Okay, I promise.
All right, that's moving stuff, so I'm gonna look in the eye just while I talk to you about this a little bit, which is, so, you know, I'm not any kind of genius realizing this is a beautiful moment. Obviously, you know, I was lucky enough to be holding a camera when it all happened, but obviously Joe Biden is the sort of authentic star of this moment. But not releasing it with the campaign, waiting for that exact right amount of time where it couldn't be rebutted, and putting it out with a slightly grumpy message where I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen in 2 weeks, but check out this video. Actually made this the most watched piece of video media in the entire campaign. And not just the millions who watched it on my tweet, but actually even more so the different groups who repurposed this message in different ways, with an interview with the mother, with statistics about guns, with a message from a certain group. That then this, in different commercials, in different ways, from different messengers, excuse me, was a much more effective thing than it would have been if the campaign had released it themselves. So again, you have assets you can use even when you aren't in the campaign, but that's the point I'm trying to make, right? The most watched piece of video in this election was not from someone from the campaign, me, and was not somebody who was even paying that much attention to the day-to-day stuff, me, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from inside or outside the campaign, and in fact, maybe it matters more if it's coming from outside the campaign. Oh, right, let's get back to it. So what we have essentially now, instead of having political parties as much, we do have teams, right? And people have allegiance to these teams that are essentially emotional in a lot of ways. You know, I think the 2016 election was so interesting in America in that you had, before Bernie Sanders was running, you had the major candidate from the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton, adopting traditionally Republican positions, which would be muscular foreign policy and free trade agreements, and you had the front runner for the Republicans, Donald Trump, pushing political protectionism and bringing troops home, traditionally the left-wing argument. That wasn't a problem for American voters. They're happy to switch sides as long as they get to stay with their team. And this is, I think, one of the things that's really important about the Dutch election, and I hope that we will talk about a little bit. And so what's happened is that we don't really know if campaigns work or not, but we keep over and over again doing the same tactics that seem to work over and over again. Those things I said are consensus, we just do them regardless of whether or not they work. And so when you translate that to other countries that don't have the same kind of professional class who does it, you get very mixed results. Because in the US, political parties are essentially business conglomerates. There's a certain number of companies who work for a certain number of candidates who are going for a certain percentage of the vote. And everything about the techniques that we use inside campaigns is made just to drive out the likely voters of that party. But, right, the center left loses a lot of elections, so this strategy clearly isn't working that well. Oh, we have a situation in which campaigns both seem to simultaneously work and not work. So before this gentleman on the left, John Ossoff, was dragged across the finish line by Raphael Warnock to win in Georgia, he spent more money than anyone in the history of American politics to lose an election in the Georgia Atlanta suburbs. And in fact, in the district next door to him, I think he spent like $60 million. Somebody spent $30,000 and got the same result. So we have to ourselves, do campaigns work? We know television is the best way to reach the most important part of the electorate, especially old people. We also know that nobody watches television and that it's too expensive. Both these things are true at the same time. And at the end of the day, we have to treat ourselves more like Madison Avenue and say, if voters seem like they're behaving irrationally and doing all these things, it's not necessarily their fault. We're too quick to blame the voters in the professional class. And as we say in advertising, sometimes it's the dog, but sometimes it's the dog food is the reason that the dog won't eat on camera. So when we ask ourselves this question of do campaigns even work, it's a critical question, because not only have we achieved a consensus on what political tactics are that may actually be wrong, but the voters have achieved a consensus. And the voters have achieved a consensus on the policies that they want. Not every voter. You can find some far-right people, you can find some far-left people, but generally, all the way from the center-right to the pretty lefty left, and especially highlighted in the pandemic, people want a more equal world delivered more sustainably. They want opportunity and growth that's sustainable, environmentally righteous, and has a certain degree of equity to it. The problem is they don't trust anyone to deliver that. So we have achieved a consensus on tactics that don't work, and we've achieved consensus on a platform that no one believes, but everyone wants. And that, my friends, is the mess that I will leave our moderators to start to begin to pick apart.
Well, thank you, Arun, and what a mess it is, a beautiful mess. Thank you so much. You gave us a lot to work with, and we will get into the depth of all of this, but maybe we can start, or at least try to achieve your consensus, your take for a very basic question, which is, what is the essence of a good political campaign?
I mean, there's two ways to answer that. One is the cynical way that I think Cicero's brother would have said, which is get more votes than the other guy. He probably would have said guy for sure. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the best political campaign is one that can create a sense of narrative and of urgency around a coherent set of issues. We used to call that a worldview. I don't know if people have worldviews anymore, dangerously close to ideology. But what I'm trying to say is not just to promote policy, but actually to promote the way that those policies go together and the ethos that brings them together. So a successful campaign marries the personalities of politicians and all of these things with this important and crucial platform, and together makes that into a narrative.
Right, and that makes that you actually have a living, because someone has to do it. And maybe you can talk us a little through, for people who are not very well familiar with your work, a little bit about what you did for Obama and Sanders, and then from there to what you're actually doing for the Dutch Labour Party, which is the Partij van de Arbeid.
Sure, yeah, and I think it sort of has evolved into what I'm doing now for PvdA and for a lot of other folks in Europe. But I started out as a filmmaker. As somebody who made movies, and I was brought onto the Obama campaign to make short, funny videos for the internet, which is something people thought the internet was for. That's a place where you put short, funny videos on it. We didn't immediately set out to kind of do this real documentary, authentic behind-the-scenes project, and that emerged kind of naturally as I clicked with Senator Obama, and we just sort of found more and more of this footage was really compelling, and I think I came to terms with something that every political operative has to come to terms with, which is it's not about you, you're not really the star of the show, it's about someone else, take a step back, you're not in film school anymore. So I think kind of getting all that out of the way cleared the way for what was essentially examining politics through a documentary-style verite process. And I think that became useful not just because it brought people in behind the scenes. It felt like they knew who Obama was. It felt like they could trust him. Again, like we just said, with the consensus, it's about who do you trust? Who do you trust to get things done as much as anything else? But it wasn't just that. I think that we were also able to kind of ramp up the way people see the processes of the presidency and kind of break down what seemed extraordinary into being more graspable, I think that's a word, and mundane. And that was kind of forefront on my mind when then a few years later took on Bernie Sanders' project, And by then, I didn't have to convince people this was the right thing to do anymore. You know, everybody has a YouTube video stocked full of themselves cracking beers open with everyone they know at that point. And so with Bernie, it became more of a challenge of, number one, telling the story of someone who maybe people couldn't see as the president, and maybe that was the biggest obstacle in his presidency, but then also having the opportunity to use all of the creative elements, whether that be blogs, posts, photos, videos, to tell one story. And I think the big breakthrough for me coming from Obama to Bernie was the realization that there's not one thing that can do anything. There's not one message, not one video. That narrative, as Aristotle tells it, and as we should all believe it, is transformation over time. And that too often in politics, what we're trying to do is influence everyone with this one magic commercial, or this one perfect still image, or this one thing that changes everything. But actually, it's really a gradual story told over time. And coming off of Bernie and seeing, of course, the sort of nativist revival across the world that we've seen sweep, and you all have a very good look at in the Netherlands, I think one thing that we see is that this kind of storytelling on the center left so often only happens during elections, but in the far right happens all the time. That they find the resources, they find the money to tell stories. I mean, I feel like I'm going on and I want to give the ball back to you here, but I just want to give one example from American politics. Would be Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who everyone was like, who's this genius who, like, you know, in the heart of progressive Wisconsin has become the reactionary Republican governor? And it's not him. It's that billionaires, the Koch brothers, have been for 40 years, when there's not an election, when it's not convenient, have been telling the story of labor unions as adversary, as these evil entities that force you to do things. And so when Scott Walker comes around and says, hey, the unions want to screw you, you've already heard that story before. It's not some magic message that just takes over. Oh, wow, maybe immigration is bad. You know,
Right.
No, someone has to pay for that message over time for that, something that's sort of that unsocietal-like to sink in.
Right, so that actually brings us to the comparison between Europe and the United States when it comes to campaigning, and I want to show you a slide, number 3, which actually points at something you already said. This is about the entanglement of the evangelical right with Thierry Baudet, which in a way also refers to your Wisconsin example. There is Baudet following the Trump playbook. There is the $1 million donation, which shocked the Netherlands, but in America is like
money.
buying a coffee. And then we have Jesse Klaver down under there, briefly called Josiah 4 years ago, because he was doing all these huge meetups, American style, as we call it out here, which obviously nobody can do, well, he cannot do right now during these COVID elections. So there are a lot of comparisons, and I think the narrative of European politics becoming more American is growing. You having worked on both sides of the aisle, what are the big parallels you actually see?
I mean, some of this is, again, the sort of Xerox art of politics, right? It's like,
Right.
oh, AOC had this great video. Let's all make videos that look exactly like AOC's video. And there's a lot of this going around. You know, I remember right after Barack Obama won, every single center-left politician's website was like light blue with clouds on it for like many years. And it's sort of, and so there is some of this just like, it's big, it's splashy, it's Hollywood, let's imitate it. But there's also smaller lessons and real things that I do think are the same. And then other things that I think go both ways.
Can you give us examples of what you think are the same?
Yeah, and for instance, I think that in some ways, like, Baudet is a better Trump than Trump in that Boris Johnsonian way. And there's something sort of more advanced about what he's doing because he's someone who can code switch between quoting the classics and talking populism, right?
Right.
He's someone who can sort of do that act. And Trump can't, legitimately can't. Like, you know, I don't think he's as dumb as everyone says he is. I think he definitely is very canny and has an antenna up for things. This guy isn't going to quote any kind of Greek scripture to you, right? Like, he doesn't, he is extremely ignorant in that he has not been properly educated. So I do think that's this sort of idea that people want, that on the right, it's not just this sort of populist love fest. People also do want to be a bit led by their betters. And I use this in sort of that British sense. of, you know, like the Tories sort of act like they're the responsible people who should run the country. This kind of parochial, patriarchal kind of mix in with the kind of more fun populist, we're like this, we don't like immigrants, we're here to have a good time kind of thing, is, I think, more insidious and more dangerous than just Trumpism, which again, it's America, so it's big, expensive, and spectacular. We did it big, we went with Trump. But there is no Trump without Brexit, that is for sure. There maybe is even no Trump without Wilders. Like, there, you know, I think that that the weather direction of the far right starts in Europe and then ends at other places.
And
that's why you see it be more volatile.
In
American politics aren't volatile.
We'll get to the right wing and the left wing a little later, or we dig into that a little later. You also mentioned in your presentation the political teams. And you sort of mentioned something about how important that is, obviously in the United States, but you made a reference to our Dutch elections and that it's important as well. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and a couple other places in Europe are like this too, and Australia and places where you have, you know, a lot of parties, is that you have a lot of parties, but when you really do the data, you still have the two teams. And so essentially, a lot of times it's rearranging deck chairs. Italy's a great example of this. You know, they're like, Lega's lost 3 points, Fratelli D'Italia. You're like, those are the same people. They're just exchanging three seats back and forth. You know, if you hear it would be like the Greens and 66 just trading a couple people back and forth, that's fine. Nobody's mad about it. You know, big changes happen when you lose people from one team and go to the other team. So now, when you look at, and you know, even we were looking at some polling before together, when you look at it, the really stark, scary thing is that one team has a captain, and the other team's captain doesn't seem to be there anymore. So you have, you know, the Vedette, you know, are the clear kind of big kid at the right-wing table, and then on the left-wing table, you just have kids. And so which table becomes more attractive to the voters? And you can see where some of the sort of work that especially we had to do with PVDA started from. You know, it starts from needing to essentially recreate the American experience of having a primary without there being an official primary. And so I think you do have these, so I think some of the kind of more Anglo, not just American, but you know, we get it from the British, of just sort of the opposition stuff. It's not that these systems are so prevalent or so important. It's just that the binary nature of them is so in our human nature that the multi-party systems start to resemble them.
Well, usually one of the arguments we always make about the difference between campaigning here and in the US is you only have one enemy in the US. But out here, as you said, there are a lot of kids you have to steal the ball from. So what does it mean for you as a campaigner to work in a multi-party system like ours?
It means there are a couple more steps. So when I'm talking about you need to tell a narrative, again, it's not just anywhere you run. It's not just I'm running and I want to win, right? There's always at least a couple things like, you know, I need to convince you that I like you, or take the simplest one. I'm running against an incumbent. I need to make sure the voters want to fire them first because they will not even consider hiring me if they have not decided they want to fire that person. If they are not shopping for a new plumber, they are not going to hire me, the best plumber in town, because they already have a plumber. So you already essentially, you know, do have these kinds of journeys. But then this unofficial primary, I think, becomes a much more interesting thing because you have to, I think, start earlier, which makes the fact that European election cycles are so much shorter really deadly in terms of when we look for where campaign finance and campaign reforms should be. I don't think a longer season is something that progressives, especially, or people who are running against establishment types should worry about. I think they should be asking for longer periods that they're allowed to campaign in for exactly this reason. But then also...
and I'm sorry to interrupt you, as I understand from your presentation, and I wholeheartedly agree, don't just campaign during campaign period. Don't just campaign while elections. Just campaign every day, right?
Yeah, organize, be a movement, be out there in the community making things happen.
Right.
And the other thing that's so tricky is that you have a thing that we don't have in America, and this, I will say, is the biggest actual difference. And honestly, like obviously I believe, because I'm out here working, that the differences aren't as important as the similarities, and people are people, and certainly Cicero says the same. But you have legitimately real undecided voters. Oh my God, who are these people? You know, like they haven't decided who they're going to vote for. It's a week out. You still have undecided voters. You can do a man on the street in Amsterdam today and find some people who are like, yeah, I'll make my mind up tomorrow. And they mean it. In America, we don't have those people. Those people are just exist to go on television and say they haven't made their mind up. We have non-voters. We have people, anyone who couldn't make up their mind with who they want to vote for now in America just stays home because they're not going to go that extra mile. And so this idea that you still have these people breaking, in our election here in the Netherlands, I think up to 20% of people will be late breaking votes. That's a lot, especially in a parliamentary system.
It's probably more. I think still 50–60% is somewhere up in the air. So can you imagine?
Some of them lie to the pollsters, you know what I mean? They know, like, usually those are right-wing votes and they're embarrassed.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you said, so you need a couple of more steps when you have this multi-party system. And I guess one of them is about storytelling and about engagement and how to engage with those voters, which is a big part of your work. Let me just walk you through or show you some of the examples and you can show us your magic. Can we see number 4? Because this one, obviously, we have a very young Arun, by the way, shooting Biden and this beautiful moment, which, as you said, speaks to the truth of Joe Biden. And then on the right, we have our Minister of Health, Hugo de Jonge.
Yeah.
Well, just how do you look at this?
I mean, look, this looks like the photo that you get when you buy the frame, right? Like this is like so flat and bullshit and clearly like just reeks of anti-authenticity in a way that Joe Biden does not. I think this stuff was correctly mocked. I think there's probably, I think if I was working for him, clearly that would be a stretch, but if I was, my magic would be let's do a reshoot, and if they said no, I would have said let's just really lean into it then and make this like the official cheesiest Christmas card, you know, like give it kind of like an 80s vibe and funny fonts and actually kind of go deep retro because like, you know, surprisingly, the people who like that is the best voting bloc, which is old people and Gen Z. Like if they love anything retro, and old people are like, oh, this looks familiar. I remember this from the 80s. I like that.
Yeah, so go over the top or be really authentic.
But yeah, it's like, look, if you're going to be inauthentic, then just really lean into it. You know, like,
right.
You know, this even reminds me a bit of a thing we did with Jeremy Corbyn where he read mean tweets in front of a roaring fireplace. Again, the English election was around Christmas time, so it kind of had that feel to it.
Right.
And you've got to enjoy it because something that is ashamed of itself can never be a good piece of propaganda.
Right. Let's show you another one, which is slide number 6. And it's something Tracy in her intro referred to. How do you look at Kaag's sneakers versus Harris sneakers?
Okay, I need to be totally real with you about this, which is like a lot of people, myself included, and I don't think this sort of travels in media, sort of consider Kamala Harris to be like specifically really inauthentic as far as American politicians go, like probably one of the cringiest. Whether it's sort of not like pretending to know more about music than she does, getting like just sort of not, it's just sort of a little bit of Clintonitis on this a bit. Like, you know, just again, if you're not cool, just don't be cool. It's fine to not be cool, but she's always kind of pushing that. I don't want to extend this to her footwear because I actually told you I filmed and photographed everybody. I did work for Senator Harris when she was running for Senate for a bit, and you know, and sort of her wearing comfortable shoes was definitely like a big part of the whole issue. But when you show me these pictures and we're looking at it from the style section, who wore it better, like in an American tabloid, I think Sigrid looks like somebody who is much more comfortable in her skin. And I think the kind of sneakers as, obviously they pushed it too far, and they, you know, like, and I think her team pushed it too far, but I think she herself wears it in a very authentic way that speaks to different people than Kamala's sneakers speak to. Kamala's is sort of trying to be like a bit hip and cool, and maybe that's why it's more cringy. And hers almost reminds me more of the AOC sneakers moment, if you remember her changing her sneakers on the subway platform, because that's what professional women do. This has a bit more of that vibe to me.
Right.
Again, this is all personal taste, but if I was advising both these individuals, that's what I would say.
Thanks. And then we have...
Surprised, actually, Lila, I was surprised, Arun, that, remember when Kamala Harris did the photo shoot for the cover of, I think it was Vogue, I said?
Yeah.
This was controversial, yeah.
And then they chose the one with the sneakers, and she was really angry because they were supposed to take the one with the heels. So she herself actually preferred the heels for her image.
Yeah, or at least her team did. And I think some of this wasn't just the sneakers, although I can certainly respect some people who are like, well, this is the goddamn vice president, constitutional officer, first woman, like, we don't need to go like ultra cool in the first shot, maybe let's have something more classic. I think that's absolutely legitimate, but I think a lot of the sort of worry about it was more that they had changed it without telling them. And I think especially this is probably her first big vice presidential communications, talking to the company and, relationship with the photographers. I think this is sort of a case of the comms department going wrong and that they kind of overcorrected being angry about it because it was more like, this isn't what we agreed on more than I absolutely hate her in her chucks.
Yeah. Well, and we cannot have this evening without also talking about our Prime Minister, which leads us to the next one, which is number 5.
Teflon Roots.
There we go. It's our Prime Minister on his very Dutch bike. What does this tell you about maybe his popularity also? What's the story of Mark Rutte here?
Look, he's not Joe Biden, right? Like, he's not Mr. Cool in the aviators, in his muscle car. I think he just has a really Dutch thing going on here. And sorry to again speak like an outsider, but just like, he just pours it on top of itself in a way that feels very authentic to him. So not only is him on his bike going to work, kind of bolster the man of the people thing that he's always trying to do, I think it also speaks to a larger theme that he hits, and he hits so well, which is calm statesman in charge, whether I'm on the bike, whether I'm in the meeting, I'm going to do things in my own time, I'm not going to freak out about them, I'm not going to, in a ways that the reason that he's so much more popular than his party, I think, it is this sense of calmness and this sense of equilibrium. And I think not only is this smart because people like it, and clearly like it, they're gonna, people vote for him, it gives him room to escalate when he wants to. And so I think one of his most effective tactics is whether it's in his own speaking voice, now I'm angry and everyone's like, oh God, like the teacher's angry and started swearing at the class, kind of vibe. Or, let's say there was some kind of national security crisis and all of a sudden he wasn't on his bike, he was in some armored vehicle going to The Hague, that would mean something. And that would feel like something, and that would be something.
Right.
So not only is he carving out the everyman calm Dutch maneuver for himself, he's leaving a different thing open, a tool that he has in his closet. This is something that a lot of politicians who have one note they hit over and over and over again can't do. Whether they are Trump or even Bernie Sanders, it's kind of like they're coming in the way they're coming in. Rutt's ability to have a couple different rabbits in his hat is, I think, one of his best tricks.
Right, and so one of the other comparisons that has been made a lot, and you refer to it already as well, is the comparison between Baudet and Donald Trump. And we're going to show you a video of Baudet. It's in Dutch. I tell this to our viewers, but the thing with campaign videos is, for those who are not Dutch speaking, usually it's more the imagery and the feel of it than the language, so just ignore that it's in Dutch and just feel the vibe, I would say. It's number 10.
Doe maar 10 koude biertjes. Wauw, Urk! Gaat het goed? We zijn in Urk hier, een van de mooiste vissersplaatsen van Nederland. Ik ben al heel lang echt fan van de mensen hier, van de sfeer. Hard werken, maar ook echt Nederlandse tradities. En je ziet, het hele dorp is uitgelopen, iedereen is enthousiast, iedereen gaat FVD stemmen. En ik geloof dat de vrijheid hier ook enorm gevierd wordt. 17 maart wil Urk, net als de rest van Nederland, weer open.
Nederland vrij! Woe!
Absoluut, 17 maart. Geen vaccinatieprogramma's, geen quarantaine, geen 1,5 meter, geen mondkapjes. Gewoon weer handen schudden. We gaan gewoon weer leven. We gaan het leven weer opengooien. En dat kan op 17 maart. Forum loves Earth.
Choose freedom, vote Forum for Democratie. So what do you see when you see this? And is this again a smarter Trump?
Choose goddamn freedom, that's what I think. I think that all political media, like everything in the world, is on a spectrum rather than in categories. And the spectrum, as I see it, runs from sashimi, very plain, nutritious things that we serve voters who are not sure, to heroin, which is drugs that we give our base supporters to make them into crazy people. And everything is somewhere in between here. Trump only has one speed, which is his base. And this speaks to that, to me. This is only a video, this is a face only a mother could love. This is a video only somebody who is part of that movement can identify with. But as such, it's extremely effective. I think it does what political parties, Trump, this video, the right wing generally, has taken advantage of the lack of community building on the left that used to happen. You know, parties, festivals, just getting together, whatever it was, you know, vegan potlucks because we're the left, whoever knows what it was in the 70s. We don't do those things anymore. We're just professional parties run by professionals, and they still have this sense of community. And this video speaks to that to me very much, a celebration of a community. It doesn't seem like people think, oh, Trump's just talking about himself, ego, ego, ego. No, it's actually, it is about a community that congregates around these people, and I think this video is speaking to that. But like Trump's, it's also, it will not get votes, it will not peel votes away from anyone.
Right, and you said this speaks to the sense of community and that the left has lost the ability to organize, or at least maybe they didn't lose the ability, they just didn't do it. Isn't Georgia somewhat hopeful, though, in that sense? Because there was a lot of community organizing, maybe not by the party itself, but organizations around them.
Not only was there organizing, but Stacey Abrams, and I don't want to just say her name only, there are many other organizations, but we're working on organizing Georgia in the off years, right? The thing that I think, talking about consensus, I think the three of us have achieved the consensus that we think electioning outside of elections is the key to everything. This is what happened in Georgia. Will it stick? We're not sure. Does it work without Trump? We're not sure. Is Georgia still Georgia? Probably. Texas is for sure still Texas. So some of this is sort of a special thing raised around that person. But no, I don't think that's about a sense of community coming from the party. And so, yeah, if there were messengers in Georgia saying you got to do this thing, you got to vote for these people, that's fine. But I still don't see the Democratic Party as a place where people are going to bring their kids on a Sunday. You know, let's take something like the NRA. You know, people think it's sort of a political thing. It's not. It's a cultural thing. People join the NRA because their kids can go to a discounted summer camp that way. When was the last time you heard a group who wanted more sensible gun rights running a summer camp where they teach kids how to lock up their guns safely? Never. So it's just there is a kind of culture and community building that is not happening on the left. And just organizing around a vote isn't even enough. And that's what happened in Georgia. It needs to be the next level up. We need to model ourselves not even on political parties, but on movements.
Yeah.
The Black Panther Party in the 1960s. Was the most important thing they did declaring manifestos? No. The most important thing they did was they served kids breakfast in Berkeley, California, and in Oakland and in San Francisco every morning. They were the ones out there serving kids breakfast.
So the bigger question then, I would say, is why is the left, and not just in America, but also in Europe, not doing that?
Gentrification.
Sorry?
Gentrification. The kind of middle of the party, the moderate professional groups, doctors, lawyers, the architects, however you want to break it all down, have taken over the party, and now you very rarely see working class people be part of their party. When you walk around the Netherlands and you talk about to old people about what they loved about being part of the PVD ad, let's be clear, some of these people haven't just left the party, they have joined the right wing. In Italy also, old people have left the Communist Party to join the right wing, not to stop in the middle, right? Because again, it's seeking a sense of community. So I think when you go in the Netherlands, you hear this longing for when great things were done, and we're a great social democracy, and we built this country, we reclaimed the land. All of these things feel like they're not possible when the parties are about smaller equivocations on things that professional people care about, people who already have money.
So, but this doesn't just speak to the fact, like the practical part of organizing and creating a community. It also speaks to the fact that you have a missing sense of common values then, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, and it's not even a sense of values. It's almost like, you know, it's just another club that you're a member of as an important and enlightened progressive part of society. This is the party that I vote for, this is how many kids I have, this is where I send them to school. It becomes sort of a lifestyle choice rather than a community thing.
Right, and if I remember correctly, I interviewed you last summer for an article for something else, and something that stuck with me was the fact that you said the left thinks a moral high ground is enough to win an election. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the left, man. What are you going to do? We want to be right. And not only do we want to be right, the end of the conversation is when the other person agrees that you're right and then thanks you for educating them, right? This is like the fantasy that every progressive has of the way an argument goes. And it's just not the way it goes. People think it's an honor to sort of lose an election as long as you stood for the right things. People think it was, you know, we did the best we could with what we had. And this is letting working people down, people who are on the margins, people on the periphery. They can't afford this. And this is why the center left is losing these people, is because they're not actually giving enough credence to the fact that when they win, they have to wield power for these people. It becomes more these much smaller compromise, sort of even the idea of bipartisanship, whether that be on either side of the ocean, you know, like if working together with people, it becomes a sort of fetish as opposed to delivering for your people, which is the fetish that Cicero is referring to, or certainly Plunkett of Tammany Hall would be, which is when you deliver things to the people who support you and who are counting on you, that's the end goal.
Right. So, and maybe we are not giving any voting advice, but we are going to show a video after Forum voor Democratie from the Partij van de Arbeid, the Labour Party, just to see a little bit of your work, and maybe you can elaborate on what we've seen after we show it, which is nummer 12.
Straks is deze donkere tijd voorbij en wordt het licht. En dan is aan ons de keuze. Wat voor land willen we zijn? De toekomst kan zoveel eerlijker. Laten we de zorgpremie verlagen, het minimumloon en de AOW verhogen. Meer betaalbare huizen bouwen. Het is tijd voor een andere koers. En ik weet, samen kunnen we de wereld aan. Dit gaat voorbij. Het wordt weer licht. Aan het werk voor een eerlijke toekomst.
So is this the answer, Arun?
Look, like I said, there is no one message that's going to take you all the way through. And I think this is a great example. So let me tell you where this is in that journey, because maybe it'll help make sense for people. And also, I think show, you know, obviously, no secret, one of the big challenges to PvdA's election chances this time have been a change of leadership midstream. And so this was the first video we released with Liliane Ploumen in it. And we actually even had rewrote, this was already a script that was planned and it was rewritten. Where we were in the journey was trying to sort of, all the videos until then had basically been about what's on offer. What's in the manifesto, what's on the platform, what can you expect, setting those things up. And this is what I would call a framing video, which happens before the contrast video and then before the rah-rah get out the vote video. So this is the video that sets what the goals are, that sets what the parameters are. We're here to talk about the pandemic and what's going to happen right after the pandemic, the idea of sort of the darkness and the light. And the other thread this is trying to weave as something that's in between that journey is this very even-keeled between pessimism and optimism. You know, it is a balance between darkness and light. We deserve more. We need more than what this government is doing, and we should expect more. However, you know, and we're hopeful for it, but can we thread that message where then it also becomes believable that you'll deliver it? and also not sounding sour, because as you know, going full negative on somebody never does. So something like this, if would have been then followed by the sort of more stronger contrasts with the government, and then finally get out the vote. I think the narrative was interrupted, very honestly, of course, by the scandal and by resignation of the government, by Lodewijk Asscher. And I do think that, you know, we're telling a narrative about what the PvdA is going to do for someone. These huge external interruptions don't do you any favors on that. And you can, I think, see why it's so disruptive. It's not just like, we're going to lose a week to this. You know, everybody really loves this person and not this person. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's that we are then reset in our narrative and we have to start over again. If we're trying to have an argument with somebody who has left the party, say these are the hardest people to get back. People who have left your party are like people who you used to date, you've broken up with.
Right.
But, you know, they may decide you're okay, but they ain't never going out with you again, right? Like, so it's a very delicate process to bring somebody back to a party. And in fact, the best you can do in the end is, God damn it, fine, I'll vote for these people. I promised myself I wouldn't, but I will, because I care about disabilities, because I care about education, because I care about whatever my issue is.
Right.
And so I do think that this sort of the interruption just put us back into reintroducing the issues, reintroducing the contrasts. And here we are at election day. And I do think, you know, we're not here to electioneer, and I don't want to be careful. I do think that because a lot of the content and a lot of the character, and I think PvdA will actually overperform what the polls are, and we hope and expect that they will. And I think that some of this will be because of some of the headlines that you were seeing come out from our kind of original narrative plan before all this happened, as you'll recall, where the press kind of writing like, oh, the PvdA seems like they're back. We're getting back to their kind of social democratic roots. Or they were starting to write the story that, they were starting to write the narrative that we were trying to tell.
I can't wait.
The interruption of this was not helpful.
Yeah, I can't wait for the day after. We'll do it all over again. Tracy, you had a question.
I have a question, and I also want to invite our audience to send in your questions as we have a few minutes left. I had a question myself, something I've wondered about for many years around living as an American in the Netherlands. We all know that so much of American campaigning is characterized by negativity, pulling the other guy down, insulting them, attacking them. And I've been waiting for many years for that trend to really take hold here too. And there have been some of these bitter ads, but really nothing like in the US. Why is it that we haven't fallen into the same trap here of negativity and personal attacks? Maybe the Dutch are just really better people? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's what it is.
Go ahead, say yes.
No, there's a couple of things going on here. One is that you need a longer election season to go negative because you have to recover from going negative. Anyone will tell you when you do a negative attack on someone, the idea is, you know, I stab them for negative 10 points. That affects me, negative 4 points. I recover mine faster because I wasn't the one who did the bad thing, you know, and they recover it slower. And kind of if I can do that a bunch of times, then I win. But it takes time because it hurts you as much as it hurts the person you're attacking, which is why so often getting someone else to attack someone is by far the best thing you can do. And as you'll recall from many, many American things, the kind of most negative stuff comes from the inter-party primaries and is then adopted by the opposite party. So, not to use an esoteric example, but Willie Horton ad from George W. Bush absolutely hung around Michael Dukakis's neck like an albatross, which was an ad about an African-American man who Dukakis released from prison, who then raped and murdered 2 women. You know, like it was like the perfect kind of Law and Order story. This was actually dredged up and made into an ad first by Al Gore in his election to be president in 1988. So oftentimes the most negative things, as long as they don't come from you, have less blowback on you. And I think you do see some of that. But here's what I want to close with, which is something that's more advanced in Europe than it is in America. And I'm about to make a lot of Americans mad. But kind of political meme culture, which can get very negative, is more organized, more interesting, and bigger with the actual voting population in Europe than it is in America. Like you see lots of like funny Bernie Sanders is on a unicorn kind of stuff, but actually like in Europe there are like meme pages with like very specific political objectives that I think do a lot of this negative campaigning in interesting ways.
Are you saying we are a little more intelligent that way?
You guys just do it with memes. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I think it may be the fact that Twitter isn't as big in politics in Europe as it is in America. So in America, all the fighting happens in these sort of little tiny knife fights, while you do have some sort of more chunky, Facebooky, commenty engagement in Europe, if you know what I mean.
I was surprised, though, on the negative campaigning part, that there are hardly any real attacks on Mark Rutte from political parties these days.
Yes.
Why?
Tough one.
It's a tough one. I think it is because he's so liked, and so the person, you have all of these parties, none of whom are the most established on the left. I think everyone is afraid if they're the one who takes the knife out to stab him, that again, they will get the most negative from that. That will mean that they will not win the progressive primary. That will mean that they were just sort of the sacrificial assassin. And I think the lack of anyone sort of who's willing to do that is a problem. And I also think that the pandemic and the kind of the way it slowed down the campaign in so many ways and forced people to reset their narratives, I think a lot of people didn't get to that part of their playbook yet.
Right.
You know, like the strong contrasts, are you better off than you used to be? Are you hoping to take a summer vacation?
Exactly.
You know, well, you better not be because there ain't no vaccines. Like this kind of messaging only started in the last couple of weeks and definitely not enough to, like we said before, to make people want to fire the prime minister and then consider someone to replace them.
So maybe as a final question from my part, is it actually more fun to be campaigning out here than in the States at this point in your life?
More fun. I think there's things that are more fun in that, you know, I get to see new places that I haven't been and new kinds of people. But actually what is fun sometimes is being able to sort of very much be able to see something so crystal clear because the details don't, you know. I think we were talking before we went on about how sometimes, you know, people are telling me what happened in a meeting and then I'm telling them what happened in the meeting. You know, I'm like, no, those are just the words that happened in the meeting. What happened in the meeting is those people told you to go stuff yourself. You know, they're like, yeah, well, that's actually what happened.
Yet another reason
so I think sort of having that outsider clarity is something that I am truly enjoying in so many ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Tracy, are there any final questions from our audience?
There are two final questions. I think one from Paul Tucker. And you mentioned something about this in the beginning, Run, but it went pretty quickly. Have you consulted for parties from other countries than the US and the Netherlands? And how do they differ? I think you mentioned in the beginning Kosovo?
Yes, I worked for Vet Pandoja in Kosovo, who just won a historic victory there. We're all very proud. Have worked for UK Labour, have worked for the PD in Italy, as well as some other kind of lefty parties there. And generally, you know, have done some work in the Ukraine and Aruba, have really been privileged, I think especially just having two big marquee names, Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama has opened up a lot of doors for me to get to do some interesting things, and I'm very grateful. I'm working with a small party in Australia now, the Reason Party. It's sort of a passion project to work with a very underdeveloped party and see where they can go.
A passion project means you don't earn anything from it.
Yeah, it means they are, you know, it's a small party, they're not pulling in any cash, but it's still good to hone your, you know, hone your skills.
Hone your skills, yeah. And I have a final question from a fellow photographer, Martine. And it's more a career tip than a political question. How did you get to be in this position? And what steps would you recommend?
Question. Okay, look, I'm going to break your heart.
Lucky, yeah?
You know, look, I wanted to get into politics. I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing for so long. And in that ways, you know, I do hope that, you know, anyone else who wants to do that can draw some inspiration. That if you, you know, work hard, know what you want to do, apply yourself, you can get in there. But actually, I spent years and years telling people how important it was to make politicians into characters and to make authentic documentary material around them. And nobody cared at all. Nobody wanted to do this at all. Nobody wanted to hire me at all. And it wasn't until Hillary Clinton had literally hired every single political operative trying to starve Barack Obama's staff of anyone that he was forced to reach outside politics and hire professionals. And so folks like me, folks like Chris Hughes, came onto that campaign because literally everyone else had been hired, and they were like, I don't know, NYU's a good school, get him in here, he should be fine. And a friend of mine, Kate, who was already in the campaign, vouched for me and said, yeah, he'll be good, bring him on. So I started my political career working for, maybe the most consequential and biggest winning presidential campaign of all time. And if you can, my advice would be do that I did, start at the top, don't start at the bottom and work your way up. It's just much easier if you can start right at the top. So the only real advice that I can give from my career trajectory is definitely make sure to say no to all the things that you don't want to do, because when someone actually comes across with something you do want to do, you want to be able to say yes.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
It's time for the wrap-up, I think.
It is time for the wrap-up. We are continuing. We had hoped to be doing live events by now, of course, but unfortunately the virus is still keeping us from that. So keep an eye on our website. We have a lot of interesting events coming up, and we do have speakers lined up who want to come to Amsterdam when they can in person to be hosted by the John Adams, and we're looking forward to that very much. One of them, just a small tip for hopefully the fall, is our dear Russell Shorto, who has written a book about his family called Small Time, and I think many Americans will recognize the reference in that word small time. It's about his family and his grandfather who were in the mafia. And they were very willing to talk to him about it, and it had 5 stars in the Volkskrant review last week. And we will be thrilled to have Russell back with us, and I hope he'll be the start of a very exciting fall program of live speakers. But before then, we'll have plenty of interesting events for you online. Keep an eye on our site, www.john-adams.nl. And thank you for joining us this evening, and a huge thank you to our guest of honor, Arun Chaudhary. And to our moderator, Laila. Thank you, Laila.
My pleasure. See you next time. Have a great evening.